have passed, so yay.
Bucket list item.
Okay, so I thought I would start off talking a little bit about my background. I went through launch code SQL cohort 5.5, 6 years ago now. It's been a little while, and Kathy was my mentor, so I just think she's awesome and wonderful. And so, and then she asked me to come back and TA, and I TA'd for a little bit, and then I became lead mentor at the SQL cohort for Launch Code Women Plus, used to be Coder Girl. And I know several of you have had me in the past, and some of you have me now. If I have you now, I'd love to talk to you because I have not met my students. So that's kind of exciting to meet them in person. So that's my launch code. And so when I started at NISA, so I work for NISA, which is a local finance company that specializes in low risk investment for large institutional players. So think the very large companies, pension funds, that kind of thing. So it's not a day trade, not a day trader, but we do have trading desk, etc. So that's where I work, and I got the job launch code, and through launch code, and it was so nice. When I interviewed, I was asked who my mentor was, and I said Kathy Kellenberger, and they were like, "Oh, you know Kathy?" I was like, "Yes, name dropping here." Kathy's like, "Oh." So, but that is
embarrassing.
Sorry, I won't embarrass you anymore. But that literally did happen. So, yeah. So when I started working, a lot of what I did at first was granting permissions, because that's what you tend to do when you first start. I'm a DBA, and most of the time we did permissions permanently. You know, you got approvals, and then we would grant the permissions, and then they would have permissions on that database forever and ever. So as I became more confident in my job, I guess, we started really narrowing those permissions to what somebody needs when they need it. So instead of giving read on the entire database, we would give you select on a table. Or the developers, I don't think developers really need to have many permissions on production. And, you know, as the lower environments, they may need more permissions. So, but if they're troubleshooting something, we might give them permissions on select on a table or something like that, execute on a particular stored procedure for maybe 2 days or a week, something like that. Well, as people do that, so at first, when they asked for temporary permissions, you can see I faked this one, but I have my monitor with all my Post-it notes on here, and I'm also, through the PowerPoint, I have some pictures from traveling, so you get to see those. And that's from the Everglades, kayaking in the Everglades. So, but the Post-it notes, but that is obviously not the ideal way to deal with temporary permissions. What do you think normally happens with the Post-it notes? You forget about them. That doesn't happen. So my next iteration, I created a table where after I would grant the permission, I would put the information in a table, and then I had it send my team and me, really just me, an email 5 days before the permissions were to expire, and then I would forward that email to whoever it was that requested those permissions and tell them to get back to me if they needed it extended or not. And then on the expiration day, I would get an email telling me I needed to delete those permissions. So that worked better than Post-it notes, but there was duplicate work. And DBAs, as most of you are developers in general, don't like duplicating work. So not only did I have to grant the permissions and then enter the information into a table, then I also had to forward that email, and then I had to go back in and delete the permissions. All that's extra work. I didn't want to have to do that. So, extra work. This is a picture of Allison, my daughter, swimming with a gator. So, you know, I just like the picture, but I can pretend like that's raising your, you know, heart rate because it's stressful, just like all the extra work. There we go. But really, I just like the picture. Okay, so I'm going to do a demo for you. First, I'm going to do a demo, and then I'll go through the objects that I use to create the process. And that's a picture of Yellowstone that I just went to a few weeks ago. Okay, I'm going to sit down while I do my demo. Okay, so I have created a database. I called it Post-it replacement. Obviously, you could use whatever database you want. Probably not titling it Post-it replacement, but that's what I did for here. And I have a table, and I'm going to show you. Oh, I already have it open. How I am going to give, and this process can use either Windows authenticated or SQL authenticated logins. If it's a Windows authenticated login, it will create the login for you. If it's SQL authenticated, it won't create the login for you. But let's say desktop. So I'll put in my server name. Hopefully I can spell it correctly. I'm assuming that you would have multiple servers. That's why you would want to know the server name on there. Database name. I'm going to do this in Post-it replacement. Username, I am going to use a user. I have the login already created. I'm going to use Pam from the office. It's my manager's name is Pam. So, and she's the one that encouraged me to do the presentation. Pam from the office. Permission type, you could do grant or deny, but I don't recommend using deny. So we're just going to use grant.
Especially if
She is my boss. This is very true. Shouldn't deny for her. Rule name. So we're just going to say data reader. Is it a secureable? No, it is not. Is it a schema? On the schema, no. Requested by, I'm putting my own name in there. Requested by email. Expiration date. And then I can put in the time. So I don't know, 6:30. And then this one is a SQL user. The rest of these will all default. So I'm not going to worry about those. So I will show you what that does. It's done nothing so far. It's just in the table. But I do have the defaults came through. So now in the real world, I have this job set up to run like every 5 minutes, but I don't have that set up for now. I'm going to show you because I didn't want to wait. So I have a job called apply temp permissions. We're going to run the job. And then you can go up. Now you see Pam from the office was a login because it's a SQL authenticated, it has to be there. Windows would not, but it's not under my post-it replacement. But if I refresh, now Pam from the office is a user in the database. And if I go in here, she doesn't have any securables because I didn't grant a securable. I granted data reader. So grants the permissions. So that's one of the steps that I was duplicating that I got rid of the duplication. So yay. Let's do some more. This time I'm going to do Pam is going to get permissions on AdventureWorks. So I'm going to use Pam from the office. I should type grant. This time I'm not going to use a role, so that can be null. Is securable? Is true? Is schema? False. Securable object, and this one needs to have the schema in there, person.person, and let's say insert. Again, requested by Sharon. Expiration date. Comment demo. And notice how the first one that we put in is active true, but is applied as false. Should have been, that's probably because I didn't refresh it after I ran the job. So it's going to bark at me in a minute. SQL user. So now the first one is applied, but the securable is not. So let's go ahead and do a few more of these and then we'll apply them all at once. So instead of typing the whole thing over, but this time I am going to do a server level permission. So I'm going to take out Control-0, take out the database name. I am going to or not. It's telling me it's the same because, okay, so we're not going to do that. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Okay, now go back and Control-0. We're going to take out the server because we're going to do a server level permission. We are going to give Pam, because she is my boss, we're going to give her sysadmin. It's false because that is a role. I'm the one that requested it. Demo. I am going to make sure that I true on is server permission. There we go. And then for the last one, I'm going to make this a server, but a securable on the server. So we can show you how we do that. Database, don't need it. Pam from the grant. And then no role name is securable will be true. Is schema is false. Securable object is alter trace. Oops, not securable object. Securable permission. Sorry about that. Requested by me. And then again, this one I am going to put in is server permission true, is SQL user true. And you could see that this one is also going to be false as it's not applied yet. So now I'm going to go down. I'm going to run my job again. Apply temporary permissions. Run. Refresh this. And you can see that the is active true and is applied true. Then if we go up to Pam's, the login for Pam from the office. Well, maybe. We can see the server role because I gave her sysadmin because she's my boss. And then the securable, which is the one that's more likely, has alter trace is right there. So they've been applied for me. So again, I add it to the table and then it will automatically go through and apply those for me. So that was the first of the 3 duplicate pieces of work that I did. Oh, those are the server ones. And then I was going to show you Pam from the office here has securables. I am all about granting permissions, what people need to do their jobs, and only what they need to do their jobs. So on the particular object or securable for the length of time that they need it. So this is a big thing for me. So here. Oh, thank you. I was like, it didn't work. It always works. So in AdventureWorks, you could see if I go to the users, Pam from the office should now show up as refresh. And then under securables, she has insert on the person.person table. Okay, so the next thing, what was the next piece of work that I didn't want to duplicate? I didn't want to have to put the information in twice. Send that email. So I have another job. This one I have in the real world, I have it set up to run once a day in the mornings because developers tend to ignore their emails. And I have it set up to remind them for the 5 days before it expires. So yes, they get repeated emails, but again, developers don't pay attention to emails, so I don't care. And they can either just ignore it, in which case their permissions will get deleted, or they can send it back to me and say, can you please extend it? So I am going to run my job, notify perms are expiring. And this will, hopefully, it'll work. So if you go to my personal email, whoa, don't do that. It didn't work. Up, there it goes. Permissions will be deleted soon. And you could see in the email, I have the username, the server name, the database, when it expires, what the permission is, all of that set up in the email. That's easy for them to read. And it just sends one. Like, even though I was listed on multiple ones, it just sent one email and it combined them all. So that's the second piece that I no longer have to do. I just let it go, which is great. If I can get back, here we go. And then the last one was to delete if it's expired. So I'm going to change my time on these so that we can have them delete. And in the real world, I run this job once an hour. So it'll delete anything that had the time in the previous hour. That's worked, that timing works well for us. But you can adjust that to however often you want to do it. We'll get there. Yes. Yes. So now that we, I'm going to run my delete and archive job. Again, this one I run every hour in the real world. Okay. So now I go back up and in my post-it replacement, I originally had it set to delete the user too, but I'm too paranoid, so I took that off. So the user will stay, and then I have a separate process that lets me know that there's a user without permissions and I can go through and delete them. But because sometimes we want a user in a database to have connect and not anything else, and just some other reasons, I took that off. So Pam from the office is still a user. However, when I open it up, you can see no more securables and, oh no, it didn't work.
Have a date wrong.
Oh, well, that would be why. Thank you. What I do on my dates. Oh, I thought I changed those.
200 year. The years. Look at the year.
2022.
Right, but on the one you're on, look at the year on that.
It's 2022, but I didn't want.
22.
Only
200 years.
That's why. Well, that's problematic.
Might as well make it. Yeah.
Your boss.
Thank you. Well, except that they are now 10/11. I thought I had changed those. Yes. Okay. It deleted 2 of them when I ran the delete job, but it didn't delete the other 2 because of probably the dates. So we're going to do that again. All right.
110.
There we go. Okay. Let's run that job again. Get rid of these guys. All right, go back in here and it should be empty. And then if I pull up Pam from the office, I don't remember which ones. The server ones, I think it's the database one that wasn't gone. And it's now gone. So you asked about archiving, and because I like to keep a trail of everything I do, if you go to, I have 2 tables in my post-it replacement database. One is called temp perms, one's called temp perms archive. So now if I go in there and select my temp perms archive, I will have the 4 that I just did. And then how I have it set up, I have this process on each server that we have, and then I have a view that pulls all that information. If somebody wants to look through, you know, past temporary permissions, I have it in one spot.
Is this like type 2?
Is this what?
Type 2. You do overtime audits too? Or is this over and every time the same person comes back?
I don't understand. I'm sorry.
So the same person, Pam, comes back and says, "No, I need it to be extended." Do you use that same row?
I do use this same row. If they wanted it extended, I just changed the expiration date, kind of like I did.
But if she's been deleted, then you have to re-add it.
Then I have to re-add it.
And then it would be a separate.
Correct. So you could, if you were really wanting the audit table to be accurate, you could actually have that delete and then do a new one. I don't, but you definitely could do it that way. One of the other things I like in here is that one of the defaults is the added by, so you can see which DBA did the temporary permissions. So, you know, I'm like, so, not really.
Somebody has access to people, some solid people too. It'll be hard too.
Yeah. So I thought I'd go through the objects that I created and how I did the process. Do you guys have any questions for me before I start going through the specific objects besides the one that you asked? Okay, I'll go ahead and go through the objects. The first one, and I have everything in a GitHub so that you have access to all of these. My last picture from Yellowstone. I can give you the GitHub is InfoJunkie1 temp perms. So, and I have all the objects. First, I have a schema. You don't have to use a specific schema, but I like using them for organization purposes. So I use perm as my schema. I have 2 tables that you saw, temp tables and the temp tables archive. And then I have 4 different sprocs that I use: apply, notify, delete, and archive. I'm going to show you these in a minute. Whoop. What? Katie has control. Katie, I'm just going to give you grief. Katie works with me. Okay. So I have this 4 sprocs for the 4 items that I do, and then I made them in 3 jobs. So let's go ahead and whoop, show you what I've done. The first one, so in GitHub, I have them labeled 1, 2, 3, like the order. Doesn't really matter, but the order. The first one is just creating a database, so we're not going to go over that. This one, I just have create schema perm, authorization DBO, and then in here I have I included my Pam from the office. I know I have the password showing, but it's just for this demo, so it's fine. So I have that first. So I just started off with the schema, and then we do the tables. And the tables just have the information as we saw when I typed in that table, has the server name, the database name, username, permission type, securable, etc. The ones that are default, I have the hours to expiration. So that way, if I am going to give sysadmin to somebody, I don't know, let's say they have to, the sysadmin has to do an upgrade for some software and they have to have sysadmin, I might give it to them for an hour or 2 hours, something like that. Date added is get default. Added by gives the name of the user that puts the information in. I always find that helpful if you're don't understand why something is in there. You could go back to that person and say, do you remember why or whatever? And in the comments section where I had demo, I will put in a ticket number for that request, and that will have all the approvals. Yes.
The reason why you're using varchar versus varchar? Do you
Not really.
People with
Not really. Yeah.
correct it all the time on. It takes twice the storage.
It does. Just kind of, we do use both. I tend to do the N varchar. And then I have, these are the is active, is applied, etc. Those are all defaulted. Oh, this server permission. Why I have that in there. If you don't actually put that in there, the server perm, you have to put in there if it's a server permission. If it's a database permission, null works fine. I'm trying to reduce the amount of work for people. I'm all about reducing work. If I'm going to make you do more work by giving permissions on an object and only for a certain length of time, I need to reduce work elsewhere. So that is my thinking there. Is SQL user, if they forget to put that in, the only time that really matters is if there isn't a login and you have is SQL user is yes, but there's no login, you get a special message instead of a regular error. So that one I'm lazy and I usually don't include. Okay, so the next table is the archive table. It's just the same. Where are we? It's just the same thing. It doesn't have all of these, and I probably could get rid of some of them, but I don't. So I just duplicated it. Has its own ID, but it includes the perm delete ID in there. Okay, now let's go through this box. The first one is applying the temporary permissions. And if you've been, I absolutely love the comment block style that I learned at my company. And so I do all my sprocs with this comment block style, and I teach SQL class to use the same comment block style. They're like, oh yeah, this is what my company uses. And the reason why I'm in love with this is because of putting the execute statement in the comment block. Because in the past, I have been known to put that execute statement on the bottom of a stored procedure when I'm troubleshooting, and then it gets into the stored procedure and creates havoc. And I have done that more than one time. So this was my favorite thing. So anyway, I have included a fair amount, and over time, I've added more debugging and error handling, and I have to give shout outs for Ryan, who was my other mentor when I went through Launch Code, was really big on error handling and debugging, and then my former manager at my work, Jared, who has also helped me with really getting more debugging and error handling. So, okay. So I use a cursor. First, it just goes through, looks at the table. Is there anything that is active but is not applied? If not, then we don't care. But if that is the case, then we're going to do the following process. So that's why it's like, it runs every 5 minutes, but it doesn't do, it's very light. So I have a cursor that goes through each line in the table. And cursor. Here I have the first part is create a login if it doesn't exist. And again, that will work with the Windows authenticated. There we go. If it is a SQL user, then it has the error message. SQL login needs to be created manually. Again, if you don't mark as SQL user, you won't get the special error message, but it will still error. And then create user if it doesn't exist. And then apply the server permissions if it's a role. And you can see all of these, each of one of these, I use my is secureable, is server perm, etc. like switches. If it's this and this, then do this, you know, and then it has the debugging. So this adds a role. By server permissions if it's a secureable on the server. So first it was a role on the server, secureable on the server. And then if it's database permissions, if it's a role, database permissions if it's a secureable but not a schema, because it's constructed differently if it's a schema. So that's why I have that switch in the table. I forgot to, I was going to include one of those. So that's how I do that. And then after all that, then it updates the is applied to true. And so it goes from false to true. And then it won't apply it. It won't keep trying to apply it every time. So that is the apply permissions struck.
So if you run it in debug mode, it prints the script out for you.
Right.
That's really nice.
Yeah, it prints it because you don't want to, if you're debugging it, you don't want to like give and take away permissions. It becomes annoying. So it does, it prints it out.
Just debugging all of your statements that you're trying to hash together, comments and SQL statements. Way easier to print it out.
So my next spot is the notify. Apply. Oh, my next spot. They're not in order. Sorry about that. Okay, notify. And so I have this set up. Creating a table with that information that I wanted to put in. And I have it set up here to notify the person 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 1 day. But again, if you don't want to be as excessive and as paranoid as I am, you could make this fewer days. One of the reasons I made it 5 days is so that if we have a 3-day weekend, it still will cover so that they get at least one email. It's kind of why I use 5. And then I have it set to, and here, I think down here, so it goes through the cursor for each row. And this is the table that using some XML or HTML, sorry, to make it look attractive on the email, because, you know, we got to look good. And then, there we go. Here, I just included this for debugging. I have it set to go to myself instead of the requester if I'm debugging it. So I left that in so you could see how I switch back and forth there on who, and if I was going to debug, I would uncomment my line and comment out the current requester line. So that is the notify. And then if we go to delete the temporary permissions, this one is set up very similar to the apply temporary permissions, only instead of applying them, we're deleting them. So there's a couple things that I have found over time that I've added, and again, have the debug set up in the same way, only this one is active true and is applied true, and the expiration date already happened before this time. Then if that's the case, then go through the cursor, etc., like we did before. This one, the first one, we had this one aired several times. What can happen if you have a user and you've given that permission for maybe a month, and then at some time during that time you take that permission away, that user away? Let's say they left the company and you take that away and you delete it for whatever reason, then it would error the delete Sprock job. And so I added some error handling. If the user does not exist, then I have it set, I think I have it set to go ahead and is active equals false so that it doesn't error out. So that kind of thing, because I'm doing this over time, I am sure that 3 months from now, I will have more stuff. But that's just kind of how it works. I like thinking of it as a work in progress. All my stuff is a work in progress. So, but then, so after that, if it exists, then goes through, delete the server permissions if it's a role, just like the apply, only this time those are all deletes. And again, at the end, after it's done all that, then it updates as active equals false, which then the next one is my archive. And this one, I originally had a way to do a variable for the number of days, and I just took that out. So I think that's still left in there. So here I'm just inserting, so I'm taking the information that is in the temp table, the temp perms table, and moving it into the archive table. And then after I add it to the archive table, then I delete where the is active is false. So each of those happens to is active is false, so it's archived. And there we go. All of these I have as transactions so that you don't, if it does break, it either does all of them because it worked or it does none of them because it broke. What I don't want to have happen is it gives some of them and not others. And then I would have to go through and figure that out. So it's all in transactions for that reason. I think that's all the objects. Oh, then I have the jobs, but they're just jobs. So I have that in there also. So those are all in the GitHub. And I also put the PowerPoint in the GitHub. So, and there we go. Questions, ask away.
Like, I've seen way less cursors being used these days. It's just a comment.
Cursors, I really discourage cursors. Just saying, but it's how I set it up, so.
I'd like to comment on that. Cursors are really horrible for code where you're inserting a bunch of rows, you know, or selecting, but like in this case, this is a perfect use because she can't send an email in a select statement, and she's got so many checks and things that she's got to do. So when I was a DBA, I used a lot of cursors in my administration code, but I didn't use cursors in like my report code and things like that. So, I mean, my thing is, you've got a lot of tools in your toolbox, and they each have their purpose. You know,
That's the other thing I was gonna say too.
yeah.
For emails and stuff like that, I would have had that as a PowerShell script or something. Because for me, a little bit object oriented in that would be, not just, it doesn't have to be necessarily PowerShell. I think most DBAs do use PowerShell stuff.
I do.
Yeah, I was a little surprised to see that was a SQL, which is good in a different way, because you can see that SQL is it's consistently in just one place. It's just going between, I don't know, you could use your task scheduler, which is not very good. It's only within your, you have to find the central scheduling place in Power Automate or something like that, so to run the code, which is good.
SQL Server can run different SQL Server.
Yeah, it can.
So you could still have it as a SQL Server.
And you could have the job run like one step is PowerShell, one step is SQL. You could do that.
I'm a developer, so I don't run the job agents.
Doesn't read email.
I don't read emails either.
Yeah, he
right?
doesn't read it.
I always joke.
Especially if it's from DBA. Julie is my DBA.
Oh.
I always thought that, and my thing was, if I had a bunch of pieces and something is, so when I was DBA, I don't know if PowerShell was used that much because I left that in 2010. But, I wouldn't want to have a script and a T-SQL and a bunch of different things for the same solution. I try to keep it like what you did. I try to keep it all together. So you could do the whole thing in PowerShell if you wanted. But again, you want to keep it.
Now you've got me like, I could
Yeah,
redo
you
it
could.
in PowerShell.
Yeah.
I could.
I like your solution. I like how you did it.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
And I agree with Andy about it's all in SQL. It's SB7 DB mail or SB7 mail.
All the pieces are together.
Did you had to set up database mail, or you're just using the store procedure?
I set up
Database
mail. As just how I had it. Yeah. I'm curious as to how other people handle temporary permissions. I have tried finding like posted.
It would be different based upon engagement. I work at a bunch of different places, and a lot of times I would be added to a role and then just remove the role, be all role based. Sometimes it would be table based like this, but it just kind of depends on how complex and mature the engagement I'm at is with their databases. Something you mentioned before, not giving developers access to production or extremely limited access to production. That works great if you're in a mature shop that has dev and test data that somewhat mimics production. A lot of the places I'm at don't have that. It's a requirement or a need for developers to actually have some more access to products.
Oh, developer. So what I consider one of my big success stories is one of the developers that I'm friends with. When I first started, he wanted all the permissions, like he wanted everything. And now I have converted him to, he doesn't want to have permissions to things that he shouldn't have, because if you have the permission on, people can bring down a server with a select statement. So even select, which we do give pretty liberally, more so. Well, it's the only one really we give. And so now he doesn't want those. And I just consider that one of my biggest success stories.
Completely. And my argument is always give me enough data to where I can mess it up in dev or test. And I don't want broad permissions. I don't want to touch my code after I hand it off to me. And I got no trail about it.
Then you can blame the DBA. It's your fault. You deployed it.
I know in case of like cloud, Azure SQL and stuff like that, you know, or your data lake, they try to use like skim maps, stuff like that. I don't know if there's anything like that for SQL Server or any other on-prem database. Again, I'm a developer. It's a question for you guys. I don't know if there's one
I don't know.
an app to maintain permissions for database.
I don't know of any. Now I know that like okay, that gets back to not trusting. So the sysadmins control who's in the roles and the AD groups. And so I work with the developers and the database owners to make sure that the correct AD groups are used. I don't want to rely on the sysadmin to grant permissions on they're certainly not going to have it on a specific object for 2 weeks. They're not doing that. So I don't know of another way to do it. But that's why I was curious as to, you know, what other people use or know of other options.
I think it's nice that you're having that expiration and you're granting for a limited period of time. You know, okay, I'm going to be developing for 2 months. Ours are, you know, we usually use Active Directory groups, and it's most of the time it's role based. We're trying to get it to the point where it's more limited. Depends on the database of what the objects are. But we run into the situation where the person leaves the company, the AD account gets cleaned up, and that will clean up from groups. But if somebody granted individual login to the login, created a login instead of just using a group, that login is hanging around out in the SQL Server.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've done in the past year is go through, and we don't give permissions to an individual user through their, you know, except on a temporary basis. And for that reason, so I also am the one that cleans up when somebody leaves. So the less of that I need to do is better. You know, it doesn't take them very long to delete somebody out of their AD groups, but I do another process just to make sure. But I won't give. But on the other hand, I also, if somebody needs that elevated permission for like a couple hours, like a sysadmin for if they're doing an upgrade, I don't want to give it to their whole team. I'm going to give it to that person who has the approval for the change in the change management system, and I will do it. So that's an individual person, but I'm only doing those on a temporary basis. It's kind of my big thing.
How are you tracking, or how do you know who has the authority to give the approval for this person to have these permissions?
I do everything through, we have an IT team and person who owns a database, and we do approvals through our ticketing system. And I'm really big on that. I want whoever owns that database to know, and they have to give approval even in the lower environments. It's kind of my big thing.
That could be sensitive information.
Right.
Kudos for having identified an owner of the database.
That took me a while, because when I started, our database ownership table was a bit out of date, and I spent a lot of time saying, this person is asking for such and such, and I would ask, you know, my manager, my senior, and I'm like, what, who'd I go to? And so, no, I created a table that has for each database who is the person who is the approver.
Great.
Yeah, I'm very big on using our ticketing system and keeping my ducks all lined up.
I feel like this would become a little bit of a maintenance nightmare for you as a DBA. If it's not like a short-term thing, how do I say this? Because in our team in our SDA alone, there are close to 100 people. And we normally have access to the Clarity database as a DB reader.
Right, so we do have a variety, like there's some permissions that I'll give more freely, and I say I just because I'm kind of the, Pam calls me, if you saw the bio at all, she calls me a Security Czarina. Probably because I'm the one trying to tighten things up, but on the other hand, I do want people to be able to do their jobs. So
This is just for temporary.
this is just for temporary.
So-
We do
so
give
they have-
permissions.
They do have AD groups set up
Yeah.
with permanent permissions.
Yeah. And this I mean, you can use AD groups and if you're giving a group, permissions for on a week, or it tends to be either a week or like 2 months or something like that. And I won't do it much longer than that unless I really have
Do you
to.
have permanent permissions out there too?
Yes.
AD groups with permanent.
Yeah.
data readers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's what I know.
Our developer, inevitably, whichever engagement I'm at, developer for an application will need a non-expiring password for next application. Stick around 2 or 3 months, and
That's
be
okay.
careful with those.
You know my story about my developer friend who I've converted. Mhm. I will say no more. Yeah.
So auditing those is a good idea. I realize it's completely out of the scope of what we're talking about here, but.
And even for temps, you're fine giving to the user instead of like service account.
We can do service accounts through this also, and sometimes service accounts are usually more likely to be ongoing rather than needing it for a short time. But it works for service accounts, any Windows authenticated user.
I have service accounts for this area. They're up in Azure. I have to come in, set up service accounts.
Mhm.
And some are data reader, some are elevated, like they've requested a schema, and I say, okay, the service account can execute it.
So as an extension to what she said,
Mhm.
my question is so that we'll get some permission initially to a service account to make sure that level of permission is enough. So that will be temporary initially. And then if that
Yeah.
is the level of permission we want, then we will switch it to the permanent.
It's really cool.
Thank you.
Use it enough to ever think about having a front end where you can just pick can modify your table for your temporaries instead of having to.
Okay, we've talked about that. My concern about that is the approval trail with the changes. If I could figure that part out, then yes, we can do that internally. We have a way that we could easily have the person put it in there. I'm also a big stickler on the approval chain.
Oh, for sure. I like the ticket column where you could put in the audit ticket number that gives them
Yep.
access. That's
Mhm.
There's no questions online. We've asked. Any other questions?
I have to say that yesterday I did a dry run of my presentation at work, and the questions were all about Allison swimming with the gator. I'm just saying.
Well, we see that she's here, so we know.